An innocent girl is sentenced to death, accused of a brutal crime she swears she didn't commit. With no family left, no lawyer willing to fight, and time running out, she prepares for her final day. But then, her dog does the unthinkable. A loyal German shepherd taken in by a lonely old man starts acting strangely every time a certain face appears on TV. That single reaction sparks a chain of discoveries, evidence no one wanted to find, secrets someone tried to bury, and a race to save a life before it's too late. Why did this dog remember what everyone else missed? And can the truth be proven before the clock runs out? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Thunder rumbled across the darkening sky as Lila Monroe swept the last bits of dirt from aisle 3 of Harrow's General Emporium. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the shelves of canned goods and household items. Her German shepherd, Bruno, sat alertly by the checkout counter, his brown eyes following her every move. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the broom handle. The memory of that morning's confrontation with Vincent Harrow still burned fresh in her mind. His red face and spittle-flecked words echoed in her ears. "You ungrateful little nobody! How dare you accuse me of shorting your pay? You're fired." She glanced at the security camera in the corner, the same one that had recorded her standing up to him about the missing hours on her paycheck. 3 years of working every shift she could get, trying to save for college, and it had ended like this. Bruno's tail thumped against the linoleum floor as she approached the counter. "Almost done, boy," she said softly, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. The dog leaned into her touch, offering silent comfort as he had since Mom died 2 years ago. Rain pelted against the store's front windows, creating rivers of water that distorted the view of the empty parking lot. Lila finished her closing duties mechanically, her mind wandering to the bills waiting at home. The rent was due next week, and now she had no job. It wasn't until she got home that she realized she'd left her phone charger in the break room. With only 2% battery left and no spare charger, she knew she'd have to go back. The clock read 9:45 p.m. The store would be closing in 15 minutes. "Come on, Bruno," she called, grabbing her keys. The dog followed eagerly, jumping into the passenger seat of her old Honda Civic. The wipers squeaked across the windshield as they drove through the storm, back to Harrow's. The store's lights were still on when they pulled into the lot, but Vincent's cherry-red Corvette was the only vehicle remaining. Lila's stomach clenched at the thought of facing him again, but she needed that charger. She couldn't afford to buy another one. As they walked around to the back entrance, the employee entrance she'd used hundreds of times before, she noticed the door wasn't properly closed. A sliver of light escaped through the gap. Strange, Vincent was usually obsessive about security. Bruno's ears perked up, and a low whine escaped his throat. "It's okay," Lila whispered, though uncertainty crept into her voice. She pushed the door open, wincing at its slight creak. The back hallway was empty, but Bruno's nails clicked tensely against the floor as they walked past the break room. The light in Vincent's office spilled into the corridor, and an odd metallic smell hung in the air. "Mr. Harrow?" Lila called out softly. No response. She reached the office doorway and froze. Vincent Harrow sat slumped in his leather chair, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. A pool of dark liquid spread beneath him, and on his desk, a crystal Business Leader of the Year award lay shattered, its edges stained red. "Oh, God," Lila gasped, rushing forward without thinking. "Mr. Harrow!" She grabbed his shoulder, shaking him. His skin was cool to the touch. Her hand came away wet with blood. Panic seized her chest as she fumbled for her phone, her trembling fingers leaving red smears on the screen. She hit the emergency call button, but as the operator answered, the phone slipped from her blood-slicked hands, clattering to the floor. The impact must have ended the call. Lila reached down to grab it, accidentally brushing against the broken award. More blood stained the sleeve of her gray hoodie. Her breath came in short gasps as the reality of the situation crashed over her. In the distance, sirens wailed. Bruno's sharp bark cut through her mental fog. The dog stood rigid in the doorway, his hackles raised as he stared down the hallway. Lila backed away from Vincent's body, her shoes squeaking on the bloody floor. A figure appeared in the hallway, Craig Weaver, the warehouse supervisor. His face was calm, almost eerily so, as he took in the scene before him. His eyes moved from Vincent's body to Lila's blood-stained clothes, then to her terrified face. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice steady and controlled. Before Lila could respond, the building filled with the sound of boots and shouted commands. Police officers flooded the hallway, weapons drawn. Bruno's frantic barking echoed off the walls as rough hands grabbed Lila's arms, forcing them behind her back. "Don't move," an officer ordered as cold metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Lila stood in shocked silence as they read her rights, her mind unable to process how everything had gone so horribly wrong. Through tear-blurred eyes, she watched Bruno straining against his leash, barking desperately as an officer held him back. Craig Weaver remained in the hallway, his expression unreadable as he watched the police lead her away. The storm raged on outside, thunder drowning out Bruno's continued barking as Lila was escorted through the rain to a waiting police car. The last thing she saw before they pushed her into the back seat was Craig speaking calmly to one of the officers, gesturing toward the office where her former boss lay dead. A week later, Lila sat in the stark fluorescent light of Courtroom B, her orange jumpsuit harsh against the polished wooden benches. The chains around her ankles clinked softly as she shifted, trying to focus on Judge Marcus Henderson's voice as he read the charges. The words "premeditated murder" echoed through the nearly empty courtroom, making her stomach clench. Her public defender, Alan Ross, barely glanced up from his worn leather briefcase. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his tie hung slightly crooked as he shuffled through a stack of papers. He'd spent less than 20 minutes with Lila before the hearing. His questions rushed and distracted. "Do you understand the charges against you, Ms. Monroe?" Judge Henderson's stern voice cut through her thoughts. "Yes, Your Honor," Lila answered quietly, her voice barely carrying across the room. The words felt foreign in her mouth, like she was speaking someone else's lines in a terrible play. Through the courtroom's narrow windows, she caught a glimpse of the animal control van pulling away. Bruno had been led away that morning, his confused whine still ringing in her ears. The officer had mentioned something about a 10-day hold, but everything after that was uncertain. Like her own future, Bruno's fate now hung in the balance. As the preliminary hearing progressed, District Attorney Sarah Chen built her case with methodical precision. She stood at the prosecution table, her navy suit crisp and professional, as she presented the evidence to the judge. The defendant's hoodie, recovered from the scene, was covered in the victim's blood, Chen stated, holding up photographs. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, a crystal award that Mr. Harrow had received just months before his death. Ross didn't object as Chen continued, describing witness statements from store employees who had heard Lila confronting Vincent earlier that week. Multiple witnesses confirmed that the defendant shouted at Mr. Harrow, quote, "You can't get away with this," during a heated argument about her wages. Lila's hands trembled in her lap as she remembered that moment, how she'd finally gathered the courage to stand up for herself, only to have it twisted into something sinister. She wanted to explain, to tell them about the missing hours on her paychecks, about Vincent's rage when she'd questioned him, but Ross had advised her to stay silent. The courtroom fell silent as Craig Weaver took the stand. He wore a charcoal gray suit that seemed to emphasize his composed demeanor. His voice remained steady as he described finding Lila in Vincent's office. "I was doing my final warehouse checks when I heard a noise," Craig testified, his hands folded calmly in his lap. "When I reached Mr. Harrow's office, I found Ms. Monroe standing over his body. She appeared distressed, covered in blood." D.A. Chen held up an evidence bag containing Lila's gray hoodie. "Mr. Weaver, is this the hoodie you later found in the trash bin behind the store?" "Yes," Craig nodded. "I noticed it while the police were conducting their investigation. It was partially hidden under some cardboard boxes." Lila's mind raced. She remembered dropping her phone, trying to call 911, but no one mentioned the call. Ross hadn't even asked about it when she'd tried to tell him. She scribbled a note on the legal pad in front of her, pushing it toward Ross, but he waved it away without reading it. As the days passed, the prosecution's case grew stronger. The store's security footage, which might have shown what really happened that night, was reportedly corrupted, a convenient technical malfunction that Ross never questioned. Each piece of evidence seemed to lock into place like puzzle pieces, forming a picture of guilt. The trial moved quickly, unusually so, some observers noted. But with Governor Patterson's upcoming re-election campaign focusing on being tough on crime, and several prominent Harrow family donors pressing for swift justice, the case had become a priority. After just 4 days of testimony, the jury received their instructions. Lila sat rigid in her chair as they filed out. Ross had already started packing his briefcase, as if anticipating a quick verdict. He wasn't wrong. 30 minutes later, the jury returned. The forewoman, a middle-aged woman who wouldn't meet Lila's eyes, stood to deliver the verdict. "In the matter of the state versus Lila Monroe, on the charge of premeditated murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." The words hit Lila like physical blows. She swayed slightly in her chair, her vision blurring as Judge Henderson prepared to deliver her sentence. The courtroom seemed to fade around her, voices becoming distant and muffled. Given the heinous nature of this crime, Judge Henderson's voice cut through her daze. And considering the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, this court sentences you to death by lethal injection. A small gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even D.A. Chen looked slightly surprised at the severity of the sentence. But Judge Henderson continued, his gavel striking with finality as he concluded the proceedings. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed around Craig Weaver. Camera flashes illuminated his solemn expression as he spoke about justice being served, about how the community could now heal. His voice carried through the open doorway as officers led Lila away. The walk to her cell passed in a blur. The concrete walls closed in around her as the heavy door clanged shut. Lila sank onto the thin mattress, her eyes fixed on the blank wall opposite her bunk. The reality of her situation pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Across town, in the sterile confines of the county animal shelter, Bruno paced his kennel. A pink notice hung on the wire door, its message stark and clear. Hold expires in 10 days, scheduled for euthanasia if unclaimed. The German shepherd paused in his pacing, lifting his head to let out a mournful whine. Through the small window high in the shelter wall, storm clouds gathered once again over Fair Hollow, as if nature itself mourned the injustice unfolding below. The morning sun filtered through dusty blinds as Ray Calder sat at his kitchen table, mechanically turning the pages of Fair Hollow's weekly newsletter, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. The landline phone rang again, probably his sister Catherine checking in for the third time this week, but he let it go to voicemail. At 62, Ray had settled into a quiet routine since retiring from the K-9 unit 5 years ago. His small ranch-style house on the outskirts of town suited him just fine. No neighbors meant no questions about the nightmares that still woke him, about why he'd left the force so suddenly. He was about to toss the newsletter aside when a small photo in the corner caught his eye. A handsome German shepherd stared out from the page, its intelligent eyes seeming to look right through him. The caption made his throat tighten. Friendly German shepherd, 3 years old, formerly owned by death row inmate, scheduled for euthanasia. Ray's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee mug. Memories of Max, his last K-9 partner, flooded back. The explosion, the chaos, the horrible silence afterward. He'd sworn never to handle another dog after that day. The guilt was too heavy, the risk too great. But something about this dog's eyes wouldn't let him look away. 20 minutes later, Ray found himself pulling into the county animal shelter's cracked parking lot. His pickup truck, once used to transport K-9 units, now carried only tools and the occasional groceries. He sat there for a long moment, key in the ignition, debating whether to leave. "Just looking," he muttered to himself, finally stepping out into the crisp morning air. "That's all." Inside, the shelter smelled of disinfectant and wet dog food. A young woman at the front desk looked up from her computer, her name tag reading Jenny. "Can I help you?" "The German shepherd," Ray said, his voice rougher than he intended. "The one in the newsletter." Jenny's expression shifted from professional cheerfulness to concern. "Bruno, he's been challenging. Won't let anyone near him since he arrived. We've had to sedate him just to clean his kennel." Ray nodded. He understood that kind of grief, that kind of loyalty. "I'd like to see him anyway." "Are you sure?" "He's been quite aggressive." Ray pulled out his old K-9 unit credentials. They were expired, but Jenny's eyes widened with recognition. "Oh, you're that Officer Calder? The one who trained the bomb detection units?" "Former officer," Ray corrected quietly. "Been retired 5 years now." Jenny led him through a corridor of kennels, past barking dogs of all sizes. At the very end, in a larger enclosure, lay Bruno. The German shepherd raised his head as they approached, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "See what I mean?" Jenny stepped back. "He's been like this since—" But Ray wasn't listening. He was watching Bruno's eyes, reading the tension in his body. This wasn't aggression. This was protection. Uncertainty, grief. The dog had lost everything familiar, everyone he trusted. Ray moved closer to the kennel, ignoring Jenny's warning. Bruno's growl intensified, but Ray recognized it as a warning, not a threat. He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, using the gentle tone he'd developed over decades of K-9 work. "Rough few weeks, huh?" Bruno's growl faltered. His ears twitched forward. "I know what it's like," Ray continued. "Losing your partner. Feeling lost." The growling stopped. Bruno stood, his tail still low but his posture less defensive. He approached the kennel door, nose working, as he caught Ray's scent. Jenny watched in amazement as Bruno pressed his nose through the wire mesh, sniffing Ray's outstretched hand. That's the first time he's approached anyone voluntarily." Ray felt something shift in his chest, a door he'd thought permanently closed creaking open. "What's his situation?" "Well, his owner's in prison. That murder case everyone's talking about. No family to claim him. His hold expires in 3 days. Jenny hesitated. "With his behavioral issues, we can't put him up for regular adoption." Ray stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement. I'll take him." "Sir, are you sure?" Given his current state dash. "I'm sure." Ray turned to face her, his expression firm. "I've handled more difficult cases, and he needs someone who understands." The paperwork took less than an hour, expedited by Ray's experience and credentials. By evening, Bruno was sitting in the passenger seat of Ray's pickup, watching the familiar streets of Fair Hollow pass by through the window. At home, Ray showed Bruno around the house and yard. The dog moved cautiously, but without aggression, taking in his new surroundings. Ray set out water and food, then settled into his worn leather recliner with a TV remote. "Make yourself at home," he told Bruno, who had chosen a spot on the floor near the chair. "We'll figure this out together." Ray flipped through channels, passing weather reports and game shows. He paused on the local news station where a special about recent high-profile cases was playing. The reporter's voice filled the room. "In our continuing coverage of the Harrow murder case." Bruno's head snapped up at the sound of his former owner's name. On screen, Craig Weaver appeared, standing outside the courthouse in his gray suit. He spoke about justice and closure, his expression appropriately solemn for the cameras. A sound made Ray look down. Bruno had risen to his feet, his body rigid. A low, steady growl emerged from his throat, different from the defensive sounds at the shelter. This was focused, intense. The dog's eyes were fixed on Craig's image, his hackles raised. Ray narrowed his eyes, studying both the dog and the man on screen. In his years of K-9 work, he'd learned to trust a dog's instincts. They could read people in ways humans couldn't, pick up on cues that went beyond conscious observation. Something about Bruno's reaction unsettled him. This wasn't the general anxiety of a dog in a new place. This was specific, targeted, and in Ray's experience, German Shepherds didn't react this way without reason. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a gentle breeze rustling through the oak trees that lined Ray's property. He sat in his favorite wooden rocking chair on the front porch, tablet balanced on his knee, with Bruno lying alert at his feet. The German Shepherd had slept by Ray's bedroom door all night, as if standing guard. Ray's fingers moved across the tablet screen, pulling up the news clip from the previous evening. He'd downloaded it specifically to test something, a hunch born from years of working with K-9 units. As the video began to play, Bruno's ears perked up at the reporter's voice. "The conviction of Lila Monroe in the Vincent Harrow murder case has brought closure to our community," the reporter announced. Bruno remained calm, his tail occasionally thumping against the wooden porch boards. But the moment Craig Weaver's face appeared on screen, the change was immediate and dramatic. Bruno's body stiffened, his hackles rising as that same low, steady growl emerged from deep in his chest. Ray paused the video, studied the dog's reaction, then played it again. The pattern repeated exactly. Calm during the general reporting, intense reaction to Craig. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you, boy?" Ray murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Bruno's ears. The dog's growl subsided at his touch, but his eyes remained fixed on the tablet screen. Ray had seen this behavior before, back when he was handling K-9 units. Dogs didn't just react randomly. Their responses were tied to specific triggers, whether those were scents, sounds, or visual cues associated with threat or trauma. Bruno's reaction was too consistent, too focused to be coincidence. Moving inside to his home office, Ray settled into his desk chair, Bruno following close behind. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he pulled up every piece of public information he could find about the trial. Courtroom sketches showed Craig Weaver standing at the witness stand, his expression appropriately somber. Local news footage captured him speaking to reporters outside the courthouse. Each time Ray played a clip featuring Craig, Bruno's reaction was the same: tense, alert, warning. But when Ray found footage of Lila being led from the courthouse, Bruno's behavior changed completely. The dog whined softly, pressing closer to Ray's leg, his tail low but wagging slightly. No aggression, no warning growls, just recognition and what seemed like concern. "She was your person, wasn't she?" Ray said quietly, watching Bruno's gentle reaction to Lila's image. "And you know something about that night." Ray reached for his landline phone, punching in a number he hadn't dialed in years. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "County Archives, this is Mike." "Mike, it's Ray Calder." "Ray? Well, I'll be damned. Haven't heard from you since the retirement party. How are you holding up?" "Getting by," Ray replied, his eyes on Bruno. "Listen, I need a favor. The Harrow murder case. I'm looking into the store's security footage from that night." There was a pause on the other end. "That's all sealed up tight, Ray. Part of the official record now." "I know, but you always kept separate logs of what came in, right? Timeline notes, technical details, that kind of thing." Mike sighed. "Yeah, I still do. Old habits die hard. Why are you asking?" "Just following up on something. Anything unusual in those logs?" The sound of shuffling papers came through the line. "Well, there was an 8-minute gap in the footage, right around the estimated time of death. Official report marked it as corrupted data." Ray's pen moved across his notepad. 8 minutes is a long time for random corruption." "That's what I thought too," Mike said quietly. "But nobody asked my opinion." After hanging up, Ray sat back in his chair, studying his notes. 8 minutes was more than enough time for someone to stage a crime scene, to plant evidence. His years of experience told him that coincidences this convenient usually weren't coincidences at all. Later that afternoon, Ray pulled into the parking lot of Harrow's General Emporium. The store had reopened under new management just a week after the trial ended. A fresh coat of paint covered the exterior, and an "Under New Management" banner hung in the window, as if trying to erase all traces of what had happened there. "Stay close," Ray told Bruno as they entered the store. The German Shepherd padded silently beside him, alert but calm. A young clerk looked up from the register, her name tag reading Sarah. "Can I help you find anything?" "Just browsing," Ray smiled, adopting the friendly demeanor he'd perfected during years of undercover work. He made his way through the aisles, picking up a few items he didn't need, all while keeping an eye on the office door at the back of the store. As he approached the counter to pay, Ray noticed Sarah's frustrated expression as she sorted through papers. "Everything all right?" he asked, setting his items down. "Oh, just this mess," she sighed, gesturing toward the office. "Mr. Harrow wasn't exactly organized, and nobody's had time to properly sort through everything. There are files everywhere." Ray nodded sympathetically. "That must make your job harder. You know, I used to do some office organizing work before I retired. I'd be happy to help out for a bit." Sarah's face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing. The new owner's been after us to get it cleaned up." Minutes later, Ray found himself in Vincent Harrow's old office, Bruno sitting quietly by the door. The room still held traces of that night, a faint discoloration on the carpet where blood had soaked through, scratch marks on the desk where the crystal award had been knocked over. Ray moved methodically through the space, appearing to organize papers while his trained eyes scanned for anything unusual. When he opened the bottom desk drawer, he spotted it, a dusty external hard drive pushed to the back corner, partially hidden under old receipts. With practiced casualness, Ray slipped the drive into his jacket pocket while pretending to sort through files. After about 20 minutes of actual organizing, he made his excuses to Sarah. "Thanks for letting me help," he said, gathering his shopping bags. "Hope it makes things a bit easier." "Thank you," Sarah called after him as he and Bruno headed for the door. "Come back any time." In the truck, Ray patted the hard drive in his pocket, glancing at Bruno in the passenger seat. The German shepherd sat tall and alert, as if he knew something important had just happened. "Let's see what stories this little device has to tell," Ray murmured as they pulled out of the parking lot. The evening settled over Ray's small house like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the kind of silence that made every small sound more noticeable. Bruno's nails clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor as he followed Ray into his study, the sound echoing in the dim room. Outside, crickets had begun their nightly chorus, a gentle backdrop to the serious task ahead. Ray's hands were steady as he removed the backup drive from his jacket pocket, though his heart beat a little faster at what he might find. The drive felt weighty in his palm, not just from its physical mass, but from the importance of what it might contain. He settled into his worn leather desk chair, the familiar creak of its springs providing an odd comfort. "All right, let's see what we've got here," he muttered, more to himself than to Bruno, who had settled at his feet with a soft huff. The laptop hummed to life, its screen casting a blue glow across Ray's weathered features. He connected the drive, watching as the computer recognized the device. A window popped up showing dozens of folders, each labeled with dates and times. Ray's eyes narrowed as he began methodically sorting through the files, his police training kicking in automatically. Hours ticked by, marked only by the steady glow of his desk lamp and the occasional shifting of Bruno at his feet. Ray's coffee grew cold beside him, forgotten as he immersed himself in the footage. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, but he couldn't stop. Not when he was this close. Then, just after midnight, he found it. "There you are," he breathed, double-clicking on a file time-stamped 9:47 p.m., exactly during the supposed corrupted window. The footage was crystal clear, much better than Ray had expected from a store security system. The camera angle showed Vincent's office from above, capturing the entire room in sharp detail. Ray leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of his desk as he watched the scene unfold. Lila appeared in the doorway first, her face immediately transforming from mild annoyance to horror as she spotted Vincent slumped over his desk. Ray could see her hands trembling as she rushed forward, reaching for Vincent's neck to check for a pulse. Her movements were frantic but caring, not the actions of someone who had just committed murder. When she grabbed the crystal award, Ray could see the logic in her panicked thinking, trying to nudge Vincent awake without touching him directly. But as soon as her fingers wrapped around it, blood from the base of the award transferred to her hoodie. Ray watched her face contort with shock as she realized what she'd done. The next few moments showed Lila fumbling with her phone, managing to dial 911 before dropping it in her panic. The phone clattered to the floor, skidding under a cabinet. Ray made a mental note of its location, evidence that had never been collected. Then Craig appeared in the doorway. The contrast between Craig's demeanor and Lila's was striking. Where she had been all panic and genuine shock, Craig moved with an eerie calmness that made Ray's skin crawl. Even Bruno, watching the screen intently, let out a low growl at Craig's appearance. "Easy, boy," Ray murmured, though he understood the dog's reaction completely. On screen, Craig made a simple motion with his hand, gesturing for Lila to leave. His expression remained unchanged, almost bored, as if he were asking someone to move aside in a grocery store, rather than standing in a room with a dead body. Ray watched Lila's face drain of color as she backed away, pure terror evident in every movement. After Lila fled, Craig's actions became methodical. He moved to the desk, wiping down surfaces with practiced efficiency. From his pocket, he produced a pair of latex gloves, which he carefully removed and pocketed. The whole sequence took less than a minute, but it told Ray everything he needed to know about Craig's involvement. The final moments of the footage showed Craig walking toward the door, But before leaving, he turned to face the security camera directly. His expression was calm, almost smug, as if he knew exactly what he was doing and felt completely confident he would get away with it. Then he reached for the light switch, and the footage went dark. Ray sat back in his chair, his breath coming out in a long, controlled exhale. Beside him, Bruno whined softly, pressing his head against Ray's leg. Ray reached down automatically to scratch behind the dog's ears, his eyes still fixed on the frozen image of Craig's face on the screen. "You saw all this happen, didn't you, boy?" Ray whispered, looking down at Bruno's earnest eyes. "You were there that night, watching everything. No wonder you react the way you do when you see him." Bruno's tail thumped once against the floor, his eyes never leaving Ray's face. In the dim light of the study, Ray could see the intelligence in those eyes, the understanding that went beyond simple animal instinct. This dog had witnessed a murder being covered up, had watched his owner being framed, and had been carrying that knowledge all this time. Ray glanced back at the screen, at Craig's frozen face looking directly into the camera. The timestamp in the corner of the footage glowed like an accusation. 9:55 p.m. 8 minutes of truth that had been buried, hidden away on a forgotten hard drive in a messy desk drawer. 8 minutes that could save an innocent woman's life. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside Ray's house. He stood at his printer, watching as page after page emerged, each one a frozen moment from the security footage. The images felt like pieces of a puzzle he'd finally solved, but convincing others to see the complete picture would be the real challenge. Ray laid the screenshots out on his kitchen table, organizing them chronologically. Each image told part of the story: Lila's shocked discovery, her attempt to help, Craig's calculated cleanup. He slipped them into a manila folder while his laptop whirred, burning copies of the video onto several USB drives. Better to have multiple copies, he thought, remembering his years of evidence handling training. In his bedroom, Ray pulled out a blazer he hadn't worn in years. The fabric felt stiff and slightly musty, but it was the most professional thing he owned. As he shrugged it on, he caught his reflection in the mirror. Gray hair neatly combed, jaw set with determination. The blazer hung a bit loose on his frame, but it would have to do. He needed to look the part if anyone was going to take him seriously. Bruno watched from the doorway, his head tilted slightly as if questioning the change in Ray's appearance. "Come on, boy," Ray said, grabbing his car keys. "Time to set things right." The drive to the courthouse was quiet. Bruno sitting attentively in the passenger seat, his ears perking up at every turn. Ray had made this drive hundreds of times during his career, but never had it felt quite so important. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade unchanged from his working days, though it felt more imposing now that he was on the outside looking in. Ray parked in the public lot, gathered his materials, and led Bruno toward the building's side entrance, where he knew the district attorney's offices were located. The familiar smell of old paper and air conditioning hit him as they entered the fluorescent-lit hallway. The DA's reception area was staffed by a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. Her eyes flickered between Ray and Bruno, her expression a mixture of confusion and mild concern. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone already carrying that edge of dismissal Ray had come to expect since retiring. "I need to speak with someone about the Lila Monroe case," Ray said, keeping his voice steady and professional. "I have new evidence that proves her innocence." The assistant's expression shifted from mild concern to outright skepticism. "Are you her lawyer?" "No, but are you family?" "No, I'm a former police officer, and I've uncovered crucial security footage that—" She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Sir, you're not a lawyer. You're not even family. We can't just reopen cases because someone thinks they found something." Ray placed one of the USB drives on her desk anyway. Please, just look at the footage. It shows everything that really happened that night. She picked up the drive between two fingers as if it might bite her, then dropped it in a drawer. I'll pass it along, she said, in a tone that suggested she'd do nothing of the sort. Frustrated but not surprised, Ray led Bruno back to the car. Their next stop was the office of Martin Green, Lila's former public defender. The office was small, tucked into a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a nail salon. Green was with a client when Ray arrived, but after 20 minutes of waiting, the lawyer finally emerged. He looked exactly as Ray remembered from the trial coverage, harried, overworked, with coffee stains on his tie. Mr. Green, Ray started, standing up. I need to talk to you about Lila Monroe. Green's face immediately closed off. That case is closed. I have new evidence. Security footage that proves she's innocent. Craig Weaver dash. Stop. Green held up both hands. Just stop. Do you know how many cases I handle? How thin I'm stretched? I can't risk my reputation on a closed case, especially not one this high profile. But she's innocent, Ray insisted, pulling out the folder of screenshots. Green wouldn't even look at them. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. But I've got living clients who need me right now. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Ray's last hope was the local newspaper, the Fair Hollow Gazette. The newsroom was smaller than he remembered, just a handful of desks in an open office space. The few reporters present looked up briefly as he entered, then quickly returned to their screens. The editor, Sarah Chen, at least took the time to look at the screenshots and listen to Ray's explanation. But he could see the moment she made the connection. Wait, Ray Calder? Weren't you the officer who accused Lieutenant Matthews of evidence tampering in the Rodriguez case? Ray's stomach tightened. That was different. The evidence was inconclusive. But you had a public meltdown in the precinct, she finished. It made all the papers. PTSD, wasn't it? This isn't about me, Ray insisted. This is about an innocent woman on death row. Chen handed the folder back. I'm sorry, Mr. Calder, but we can't run with this. Your history, the high-profile nature of the case, it's too risky. Maybe try one of the bigger papers in the city. The drive home felt longer than usual. Bruno seemed to sense Ray's dejection, occasionally nudging his arm with his nose. The sun was setting by the time they pulled into Ray's driveway, casting long shadows across the yard. Ray noticed something was wrong before he even got out of the car. His tires made an odd sound as he parked. All four were completely flat, clean cuts visible in the rubber. Bruno's hackles rose immediately, a low growl rumbling in his chest. There, taped to the front door, was a white envelope. Ray approached cautiously, Bruno at his side, tensed and alert. The envelope wasn't sealed, just folded over. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Don't dig where you'll bury yourself. Bruno sniffed the envelope and growl intensified. He scratched at the door urgently, his whole body rigid with alertness. Ray recognized this reaction. It was the same one Bruno showed whenever he saw Craig on screen. Inside, Ray double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains. He tried to settle in his armchair with a book, but his police instincts wouldn't let him relax. Every creak of the house, every passing car, seemed to carry potential threat. Bruno paced between windows, occasionally stopping to listen intently, his behavior confirming Ray's own unease. As midnight approached, Ray gave up any pretense of sleep. He sat in his darkened living room, Bruno vigilant beside him, both of them watching the shadows for movement. The envelope lay on his coffee table, its message clear. Someone knew what he'd found, and they weren't going to let him expose the truth easily. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ray's kitchen as he adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. He hadn't dressed this formally since retirement, but today's mission required a certain appearance. Bruno watched from his usual spot by the door, head tilted in curiosity at his owner's transformation. "Looking professional matters, buddy," Ray explained, smoothing down his jacket. "People take you more seriously when you look the part." The drive to the county records office took 20 minutes, giving Ray plenty of time to rehearse his story. He'd chosen his approach carefully. Claiming to be writing a memoir about local businesses seemed innocent enough to avoid suspicion, but relevant enough to justify his research. The records office occupied the basement of an aging government building. The air grew cooler and mustier as Ray descended the concrete stairs, his footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. At the bottom, a heavy metal door opened into a fluorescent-lit room that smelled of old paper and dust. Behind a desk cluttered with manila folders sat Mrs. Henderson, a woman Ray remembered from his police days. Her silver hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn for decades, and her reading glasses hung from a beaded chain around her neck. "Ray Calder," she said, peering at him over the rims of her glasses. "Haven't seen you down here in years." Ray managed a warm smile. "Working on a little project, Margaret. Writing my memoirs, actually. Focusing on local businesses, their impact on the community. Thought I'd start with Harrow's Emporium, given recent events." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with interest. "A memoir? Well, that's something. You'll need to fill out these forms." She pushed a stack of papers across the desk. "Standard confidentiality agreements, you understand. And I can only grant you access to basic employment records, nothing from ongoing investigations." "Of course," Ray agreed, signing where indicated. His hand remained steady despite his racing heart. 20 minutes later, Ray sat at a metal desk in the archives room, surrounded by boxes of employment records from Harrow's Emporium. He worked methodically, careful not to appear too focused on any particular file. When he finally pulled out Craig Weaver's folder, he kept his expression neutral despite the surge of anticipation in his chest. The folder contained standard employment paperwork, application forms, tax documents, performance reviews. But there, tucked between pages of insurance forms, was what Ray had hoped to find. A fingerprint scan sheet from an internal security audit 3 years ago. The sheet was yellowed at the edges, but the prints remained clear and dark against the white paper. Ray glanced around the empty room, then carefully positioned his phone to photograph the fingerprint sheet. He made sure to capture several angles, checking each image for clarity before sliding the sheet back into place. The next phase of his plan had already been set in motion. Earlier that week, he'd reached out to Tommy Martinez, an old colleague who now worked in evidence storage. Tommy owed Ray a favor from their patrol days, and though he couldn't remove evidence, he had allowed Ray 5 minutes alone with his camera in the evidence room. The photographs of the leather gloves, the ones Craig had supposedly found in the trash and submitted as evidence against Lila, were stored on Ray's phone alongside the fresh images of the fingerprint sheet. The gloves had been turned inside out during collection, preserving any prints from their last wearer. Back home, Ray spread his materials across his dining room table. Bruno settled at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch Ray work. The fingerprint kit Ray had ordered arrived that morning, professional grade, the same type he'd used countless times during his career. With practiced precision, Ray began the process of lifting and comparing prints. He worked slowly, methodically, just as he'd been trained. The partial prints from the gloves were fragmentary, but distinct. When laid side by side with the employment record prints, the ridge patterns aligned perfectly. "Got you," Ray muttered, examining the matches through his magnifying glass. Bruno's ears perked up at the sound of his voice. This was what everyone had missed, or chosen not to look for. The gloves that had supposedly incriminated Lila actually proved Craig's presence at the scene. The evidence that helped convict her could help set her free. Ray gathered the photographs and print comparisons into a fresh folder, carefully labeling everything. He'd learned from his previous attempts. This time, he needed someone who would actually listen, someone hungry enough for truth to take risks. He found Naomi Quill's number on her podcast website. Her show, Untold Justice, focused on cases where official narratives didn't match the evidence. Her latest episode had questioned the conviction of a local businessman for embezzlement, presenting compelling evidence that he'd been framed by his partners. Ray's hand shook slightly as he dialed. The phone rang 3 times before a young woman's voice answered. "This is Naomi Quill." "Ms. Quill, my name is Ray Calder. I'm a former police officer, and I have evidence that proves Lila Monroe is innocent of Vincent Harrow's murder." There was a pause on the line. When Naomi spoke again, her voice was careful but interested. "That's a significant claim, Mr. Calder. What kind of evidence?" "Security footage showing what really happened that night. Fingerprint evidence proving someone else was there. And a witness. Well, sort of." Ray glanced down at Bruno, who had lifted his head at the sound of voices. "Sort of?" "It's complicated. Better explained in person. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow? I can show you everything I've found." Another pause, shorter this time. "Okay, Mr. Calder. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. There's a coffee shop called the Daily Grind on Oak Street. We can talk there." "Thank you, Ms. Quill. I'll bring everything." After hanging up, Ray organized his evidence one more time, making sure everything was clear and properly documented. Bruno stayed close, moving between the windows with quiet alertness, his protective instincts still heightened since the threat left on their doorstep. Ray watched his companion's careful patrol of the house. "Tomorrow's important, boy," he said softly. "We might finally find someone who'll listen." Bruno paused his vigilance long enough to rest his head on Ray's knee, his dark eyes fixed on the window, standing guard as the evening shadows lengthened across the yard. Ray arrived at the Daily Grind 15 minutes early, clutching a worn leather briefcase containing everything he'd discovered. The coffee shop was quiet at this hour, with just a few regulars scattered among the mismatched tables and vintage chairs. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but Ray's stomach was too knotted with anticipation to think about breakfast. He chose a corner table that offered a clear view of both the entrance and his car parked outside, where Bruno sat alert in the passenger seat. The German shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the coffee shop door, his posture tense but controlled. At precisely 9 o'clock, a young woman with dark-rimmed glasses and a messenger bag walked in. She scanned the room briefly before spotting Ray. Her stride was purposeful as she approached his table. "Mr. Calder?" she asked, extending her hand. "Naomi Quill." Ray stood to shake her hand, noting her firm grip and direct gaze. "Thank you for meeting me, Ms. Quill. Please, call me Naomi." She settled into the chair across from him, pulling out a small digital recorder and a notebook. "Before we start, I should tell you that I've researched you. Your service record, the incident that led to your retirement, everything that's public record." Ray nodded, unsurprised. And I'm still here," she said with a slight smile. "That counts for something. Now show me what you found." For the next hour, Ray methodically laid out his evidence. He started with the security footage, playing the recovered clip on his laptop. Naomi leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she watched Lila's panicked discovery of Vincent's body and Craig's subsequent appearance. "Stop there," she said, pointing to the screen. "Go back 10 seconds. She studied Craig's movements as he entered the office, noting his calculated gestures and the gloves. He knew exactly where the cameras were. Ray then presented the fingerprint evidence, explaining how he'd obtained both sets of prints and verified the match. Naomi took photographs with her phone, asking detailed questions about chain of custody and verification methods. "The gloves were submitted as evidence against Lila," she said, frowning. "But nobody thought to check the inside for prints?" "They had their narrative," Ray replied. "Sometimes that's all they look for." "And Bruno?" Naomi asked, glancing out the window at the German Shepherd. "Tell me about his reactions." Ray described Bruno's consistent response to Craig's image, explaining the dog's training background and the significance of such specific behavioral patterns. Naomi made rapid notes, occasionally interrupting with clarifying questions. As their meeting stretched into its second hour, Naomi sat back in her chair, tapping her pen against her notebook. "This is compelling, Mr. Calder. Very compelling. But you should know, going public with this could be dangerous. Craig Weaver has powerful connections in this town." "I know," Ray said quietly. "I've already received warnings." Naomi nodded, her expression determined. "Give me until tonight. I'll have the episode ready by 10. That evening, Ray sat at his desk, refreshing Naomi's podcast page every few minutes. Bruno lay nearby, his head resting on his paws. At exactly 10 p.m., the new episode appeared. The Dog That Wouldn't Forget. Naomi's voice filled Ray's speakers, clear and confident. This is a story about justice, memory, and the unexpected ways truth finds its voice. Tonight, we're going to tell you about Lila Monroe, a young woman on death row, and Bruno, the dog who never forgot what he saw. The episode masterfully wove together the elements of the case. Naomi presented the evidence methodically, building tension as she revealed each new piece of information. She included audio clips from the security footage, detailed explanations of the fingerprint evidence, and a powerful description of Bruno's consistent reactions to Craig's presence. "Consider this," Naomi's voice continued. "A trained German Shepherd, known for his calm demeanor, exhibits strong defensive reactions only when exposed to one specific person involved in this case. The same person whose fingerprints were found inside the gloves used to handle the murder weapon. The same person who appears in recovered security footage behaving in ways that directly contradict his court testimony." By midnight, the episode had been downloaded thousands of times. Social media exploded with comments and shares. The hashtag #JusticeDog began trending, accompanied by the photo of Bruno sitting vigilant on Ray's porch, his noble profile silhouetted against the evening sky. As dawn broke, the story had spread across the state. News outlets picked up the podcast, running segments that featured Bruno's photo alongside headlines questioning Lila's conviction. People shared their own stories of wrongful convictions, of evidence overlooked, of justice delayed but not denied. Ray watched in amazement as his phone filled with notifications. Bruno seemed to sense the excitement, staying closer than usual, his tail wagging whenever Ray read comments aloud. At 11:45 a.m., Ray's phone buzzed with a news alert. The governor's office had released a statement. Due to new evidence and public interest, Lila Monroe's execution has been officially postponed, pending review. Ray's hand shook as he read the words aloud. "Did you hear that, boy? They're going to look at the case again." Bruno's tail thumped against the floor, his eyes bright and alert. Miles away in a small cell at the state prison, Lila sat on her narrow bed staring at the concrete wall as she had every day for months. The sound of footsteps approaching made her turn. A guard she knew as Thompson appeared at her door. "Monroe," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "Just got word from the governor's office. Your execution's been postponed. They're reviewing your case." Lila stared at him, uncomprehending at first. Then the words sank in, breaking through the protective numbness she'd built around herself. Her vision blurred as tears welled up. months of suppressed emotion finally finding release. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Thompson stood quietly for a moment before adding, "There's a dog involved somehow. People are calling him Justice Dog. Thought you might want to know." Through her tears, Lila smiled for the first time since her arrest. "Bruno," she whispered. "Good boy." The morning sun filtered through Ray's kitchen windows as his phone buzzed for the 20th time that hour. He sat at his worn oak table, a cold cup of coffee forgotten beside him, sorting through the flood of voicemails and messages that had started pouring in since dawn. Bruno lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head when Ray's expression changed, while listening to particularly interesting calls. The German Shepherd had developed an uncanny ability to read his new owner's subtle reactions. "Another law firm," Ray muttered, making a note in his growing list. Most of the calls were from attorneys eager to take on Lila's case pro bono, riding the wave of public interest generated by Naomi's podcast. Others came from major news networks, requesting interviews and exclusive rights to the story. The phone buzzed again. Ray didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, his voice tired but professional. "Ray Calder, speaking." The voice that responded was quiet, measured, almost pleasant. "You think you're a hero, Calder. You'll be a headline next." Ray's hand tightened on the phone. Before he could respond, the line went dead. Bruno suddenly stood up, hackles raised, staring intently at the front window. His tail went rigid, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Ray moved to the window, carefully peering out from behind the curtain. The street appeared normal, Mrs. Henderson walking her poodle, kids waiting for the school bus, the usual morning scene. But Bruno's reaction told him something wasn't right. Within an hour, Ray had called a security company. The technician arrived promptly, installing motion sensors, cameras, and reinforced locks on all doors and windows. Ray watched as the man worked, Bruno following close behind, inspecting each new addition with careful attention. "That should do it, Mr. Calder," the technician said, handing over a tablet showing the camera feeds. "Everything's connected to your phone. Any movement outside triggers an alert." Ray nodded, already feeling more secure with the new systems in place. But he knew hardware alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to file an official report about the threat. The local police station looked exactly as he remembered it. Same faded brick exterior, same squeaky front door. 2 officers were dispatched to take his statement. Officer Martinez, whom Ray didn't know, and Detective Pete Walsh, his former colleague from the K-9 unit. Martinez took notes with visible disinterest as Ray described the threatening call. "Could have been anyone," he said, shrugging. "Probably just some random person who disagrees with the podcast." But Walsh's expression told a different story. The detective kept glancing at his partner, then back at Ray, his face tight with concern. When Martinez stepped away to take a call, Walsh leaned in close. "Watch your 6, Ray," he whispered. "Craig's got friends here, lots of them. They're not happy about what you've stirred up." Ray wasn't surprised. He'd suspected as much when he'd started investigating. "Thanks for the heads up, Pete." Across town, Naomi sat in her home office, staring at her computer screen in dismay. Her professional email account had been flooded with hundreds of messages, some praising her courage, others filled with vicious threats and personal attacks. Someone had posted her home address on several forums, along with photos of her apartment building. She'd already received 3 pizza deliveries she hadn't ordered, and a group of Craig's supporters had gathered outside her building that morning, holding signs calling her a fake news merchant, an attention-seeking fraud. Her phone pinged with a text from Ray. "You okay?" "Hanging in there," she typed back. "But it's getting intense. Craig's people are organized." Speaking of Craig, he had gone remarkably quiet since the podcast aired. His office at the reopened Harrow's Emporium remained dark, his parking space empty. The store manager told reporters he had taken an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons. No statements, no rebuttals, no public appearances. But his silence felt calculated rather than defeated, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. As evening settled over the town, Ray double-checked all his new security measures. The cameras showed clear views of his property. The motion sensors were armed, and Bruno seemed calmer than he had that morning. Ray had just settled into his armchair with a book when Bruno's barking exploded through the quiet house. This wasn't his usual alert bark. This was frantic, aggressive, desperate to communicate danger. Ray grabbed his flashlight and moved cautiously toward the front door, Bruno at his side. Through the security camera feed on his phone, he could see something dark hanging from his front gate. Heart-pounding, Ray stepped outside. The security lights flooded the yard, revealing a grotesque sight. A dead crow had been nailed to the wooden gate, its wings spread wide in a macabre display. Beneath it, secured with the same nail, was a note written in block letters. "You think that mutt can protect you forever." Ray's hands remained steady as he removed the nail, carefully taking down both the bird and the note. Years of police work had taught him to stay calm in the face of intimidation. He placed both items in a plastic evidence bag, though he doubted the police would do much with it. Back inside, Bruno took up position by the living room window, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. His posture was alert, but not tense. He was ready for whatever might come next. Ray made a fresh pot of coffee. He knew neither he nor Bruno would be sleeping tonight. The German shepherd maintained his vigil at the window, occasionally turning to check on Ray, making sure his human was safe. Hour after hour, Bruno stood guard. When Ray tried to call him to rest, the dog simply wagged his tail once but held his position. His dedication was unwavering, his protective instincts in full force. The night stretched on, marked only by the soft ticking of Ray's old wall clock and the occasional sound of Bruno shifting his weight from one paw to another. But he never left his post, never lowered his guard. His silhouette remained framed against the window, a steadfast sentinel in the darkness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Lila shuffled down the prison's medical wing corridor, her ankles chained with standard-issue restraints. 2 guards flanked her, their expressions neutral but not unkind, a small change from the suspicious glare she'd endured for months. The medical exam room was surprisingly bright, with pale green walls and a window that let in strips of morning sunlight through its reinforced glass. A nurse in blue scrubs looked up from her clipboard as Lila entered, offering something Lila hadn't seen in what felt like forever, a genuine smile. "I'm Nancy," the nurse said, gesturing for Lila to sit on the examination table. "Just need to do some routine checks, nothing to worry about." She began taking Lila's vital signs, her movements efficient but gentle. "Blood pressure's a bit high, but that's understandable, given everything that's happening." Lila remained silent, watching as the nurse made notes. She'd learned that silence was safer here, where every word could be twisted against you. Nancy paused in her work, meeting Lila's eyes directly. "You've got people out there," she said softly, her voice warm with genuine compassion. "Real ones, fighting for you." Lila's throat tightened, but she didn't respond. She couldn't let herself believe, not yet. Hope was dangerous here. She needed more than words. She needed proof that this wasn't just another cruel twist in her nightmare. Across town, Ray's living room had become an impromptu war room. Papers covered his coffee table. Laptop screens glowed with legal documents, and empty coffee cups testified to long hours of preparation. Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing their evidence into clear presentation folders, while Maya paced the room. her high heels clicking against the hardwood as she dictated points for their emergency motion. Maya was everything they needed: brilliant, aggressive, and absolutely fearless. Her reputation in civil rights law preceded her, and her presence alone lent their case legitimate weight. She'd volunteered her services the moment she'd heard Naomi's podcast, recognizing the systemic failures that had led to Lila's conviction. "The footage authentication report just came in," Naomi announced, holding up her phone. "Digital forensics confirms it's genuine, unaltered, and matches the timestamp of the alleged corruption window." Maya nodded sharply, adding another note to her growing list. "Good. That's crucial for the retrial motion. What about the fingerprint analysis?" Ray pulled out a thick folder, spreading comparison photos across the table. Independent expert confirmed it. The prints inside the gloves match Craig's employee records. 100% certainty. "Perfect," Maya said, her dark eyes intense. "Now about these threats you've received." Ray retrieved the evidence bag containing the dead crow and note. Maya examined them carefully, her expression hardening. "This fits the pattern. Craig's been using intimidation tactics from the start. First with the evidence tampering, then the witness manipulation, now this. It shows consciousness of guilt." Bruno, who had been watching from his spot near the window, got up and pressed against Ray's leg, seeking reassurance. Ray scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from the dog's steady presence. "We need to file this motion today," Maya declared, gathering the documents. "The longer we wait, the more time Craig has to cover his tracks, or worse." She pulled out her phone, quickly typing out emails. "I've got a judge who owes me a favor. We can get this heard within 7 days." Naomi looked up from her laptop. "I can have a follow-up podcast ready by tonight, focusing on the new evidence. Keep the public pressure on." Maya nodded approvingly. "Good. Public attention makes it harder for them to sweep this under the rug." She turned to Ray. "You ready for this? Once we file, there's no going back. Craig and his friends will come at us hard." Ray met her gaze steadily. "Been ready since the day Bruno showed me the truth." They worked through the afternoon, preparing the motion with meticulous care. Maya's legal expertise shaped their evidence into an airtight narrative of corruption, negligence, and deliberate framing. By evening, the document was ready. 47 pages of carefully crafted legal arguments, backed by solid evidence and expert testimony. Maya filed the motion electronically at exactly 4:59 p.m., 1 minute before the court's deadline. Within hours, they received confirmation. The emergency hearing was granted. 7 days. Back at the prison, Lila sat on her narrow bunk, trying to process what her guard had just told her. A hearing. A chance. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her knees, fighting to maintain composure. "Bruno," she whispered, the name catching in her throat. "He's really doing this." The question hung in the air, filled with all the hope she'd been afraid to feel. Miles away on Ray's front porch, Bruno lay stretched out in the late afternoon sun. A large bone, a gift from Ray, occupied his attention, though his ears still twitched at every unusual sound. His posture was relaxed but alert, ready to switch from peaceful companion to protective guardian in an instant. Ray sat in his porch chair, watching his dog with quiet appreciation. The German Shepherd had changed everything, not just for Lila, but for Ray too. Given him purpose again, a reason to fight. "Hold on, kid," Ray whispered, his words meant for Lila, though she couldn't hear them. "We're getting you out." Craig Weaver sat at his kitchen table, staring at the thick manila envelope that had arrived by courier an hour ago. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as he read the subpoena again. The legal language was clear and precise. He was required to appear at Lila Monroe's emergency hearing, bringing all relevant documents and digital records related to the night of Vincent Harrow's murder. He crumpled the paper in his fist, then quickly smoothed it out again. No signs of panic, no evidence of distress. He'd maintained his composure for months. He couldn't afford to lose it now. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. 7:45 p.m. Late enough for what he needed to do. Craig grabbed his keys and phone, checking twice to ensure he wasn't being followed as he pulled out of his driveway. The tech district was quieter at night, most offices dark except for the occasional glow of security lights. Craig parked behind a rundown office complex, its faded sign advertising various small businesses. He knew exactly which door to look for, unmarked, with a subtle security camera above it. Marcus Chen opened the door after 3 sharp knocks. The IT specialist hadn't changed much since their last interaction. Same disheveled appearance, same nervous energy. But tonight, something was different in his eyes when he saw Craig. "We need to talk," Craig said, pushing past him into the cramped office space. The room smelled of old takeout and electronic components, with multiple monitors casting a blue glow over stacked equipment. Marcus closed the door slowly, keeping his distance. "I heard the podcast," he said quietly. Craig turned, his expression carefully neutral. "That's why I'm here. We need to handle this situation." He reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope thick with cash. 20,000. I need you to create some footage. Nothing complicated. Just Lila Monroe returning to the store later that night, making it look like she came back for revenge." Marcus stared at the envelope but didn't move to take it. "You mean fake evidence for a murder case?" "Consider it digital storytelling," Craig said smoothly, though his jaw tightened. "The same work you did for me at the warehouse. Remember how well that turned out for both of us?" But Marcus was already shaking his head. That was different. That was inventory records, not... He gestured vaguely. "This is all over social media. That dog, the fingerprints, the original footage. People are watching this case now. Really watching." Craig stepped closer, his voice dropping. 30,000. Final offer." "I can't," Marcus said, backing away. "The risk is too high. Everyone's talking about this case. That podcaster's got people analyzing every detail. They'd catch any fake footage in minutes." He swallowed hard. "And I'm not going to help frame an innocent kid." Craig's carefully maintained facade cracked. His face darkened as he advanced on Marcus, but the tech stood his ground. "Get out," Marcus said firmly, "or I'll call the police right now." For a moment, Craig looked like he might lunge forward. Instead, he straightened his jacket, slipped the envelope back inside, and walked to the door. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "No," Marcus replied. "I don't think I will." Craig drove home with white knuckles on the steering wheel. His mind raced through options, contingency plans crumbling one by one. He'd always been able to control the narrative, to stay ahead of threats. But now the carefully constructed walls were closing in. He pulled into his garage, closing the door before exiting his car. Inside his home office, he began methodically removing files from his desk drawers. Bank statements, old emails printed and saved, USB drives, anything that might connect him to Vincent's financial dealings or the night of the murder. The shredder hummed steadily as he fed document after document through it. His computer was next, deleting emails, wiping browser history, removing any trace of his research into Lila's background or his communications with Marcus. What Craig didn't know was that across town, Maya was submitting an emergency motion to preserve evidence. Her careful documentation of Craig's pattern of tampering, combined with the new evidence and threats against Ray, had convinced a judge to act quickly. At 5:30 a.m., as dawn barely touched the horizon, 3 police cruisers pulled up silently outside Craig's house. Officers moved efficiently, surrounding the property before ringing the doorbell. Craig opened the door in his bathrobe, feigning confusion that quickly turned to anger when they presented the court order. He was forced to watch as they systematically boxed up his laptops, external drives, phones, and even his router. "This is harassment," he protested as they opened his file cabinets. "I have rights." "Yes, you do," replied Officer Sarah Martinez, Ray's former colleague who had warned him earlier. "And so did Lila Monroe." She carefully sealed another box of documents, marking it as evidence. The morning news crews arrived just as the officers were loading the last boxes into their vehicles. Craig stood in his doorway, maintaining a rigid pose of indignation for the cameras. But those who looked closely could see beads of sweat on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. Ray sat in his living room, watching the live coverage on his small TV. Bruno had taken up his usual post by the window, his tail tapping steadily against the floor as he watched the street outside. The German Shepherd's posture was relaxed but alert, as if he sensed the shifting tide of justice. On screen, Officer Martinez finished loading the evidence van, then turned to face the news cameras. She gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, one that Ray immediately recognized as a message meant for him. "About time," Ray muttered, reaching down to scratch Bruno's ears. The dog leaned into his touch, his tail continuing its steady rhythm against the hardwood floor. The morning news anchor's voice filled the room. In a dramatic development in the Lila Monroe case, authorities have seized multiple computers and documents from Craig Weaver's residence, following allegations of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. Sources say this seizure was prompted by new evidence brought forward by retired K-9 officer Ray Calder and podcast journalist Naomi Quill. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ray's front porch as the mail carrier dropped off a small brown package. No return address marked its surface, just Ray's name and address in typed letters. Bruno sniffed at it cautiously as Ray brought it inside, his tail low and uncertain. Ray placed the package on his kitchen counter, examining it carefully before cutting through the tape. His years in law enforcement had taught him to be wary of unexpected deliveries, especially given recent events. Inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, lay a USB drive. Its plastic casing was warped and melted, barely recognizable except for its shape. Beneath it, a single word was typed on a plain white card. "Stop." Ray's jaw tightened as he studied the damaged drive. The message was clear. Someone wanted to silence the investigation, and they weren't being subtle anymore. He reached for his phone to call Naomi, but she didn't answer. After 3 attempts, he left a message warning her to be careful. Hours later, as evening settled over the town, Ray's phone finally rang. Naomi's voice trembled on the other end. "Someone broke in," she said, her usually confident tone shaken. "My apartment. They destroyed everything." Ray was already grabbing his keys. "Are you hurt?" "No, I wasn't home. But Ray..." She took a shuddering breath. "They knew exactly what they were after. My equipment, my backups, all my research for the podcast. It's gone. They didn't touch my TV, my jewelry, nothing else. Just the story." "Stay where you are," Ray instructed, whistling for Bruno to follow him to the car. "I'm coming to get you." When they arrived at Naomi's apartment, police were already processing the scene. The place looked like a tornado had targeted only her work setup. Her desktop computer lay in pieces, hard drives cracked open, backup drives missing. Even her notebook had been torn to shreds. "This isn't random," Naomi said, hugging herself as she surveyed the damage. "They're trying to erase everything we've uncovered." Ray nodded grimly. "Pack a bag. You're staying at my place tonight." Back at Ray's house, they worked quickly to secure what evidence remained. Ray transferred all their files to offline storage, multiple copies hidden in different locations. He double-checked every window, every door, while Bruno patrolled the perimeter with focused intensity. "Try to get some sleep," Ray told Naomi, showing her to the guest room. "We'll figure out our next move in the morning." But sleep proved elusive. Ray sat in his study, reviewing security footage from his newly installed cameras when Bruno's bark shattered the midnight silence. Not his usual alert bark. This was urgent, aggressive, filled with warning. Ray bolted from his chair, adrenaline surging as he smelled smoke. It was coming from downstairs, seeping under his office door in gray wisps. He grabbed the fire blanket he kept near his desk, another habit from his police days, and rushed toward the stairs. Bruno's barking grew fiercer. Through the thickening smoke, Ray could make out a figure inside his office, illuminated by growing flames. Craig Weaver stood there, his face twisted with desperate determination as he reached for the drawer containing the backup drive. "It ends tonight," Craig snarled, turning to face Ray. The orange glow of the flames cast strange shadows across his features, making him look almost demonic. No more evidence, no more accusations, no more ruining people's lives over a stupid girl who should have kept her mouth shut. Ray stepped forward, the fire blanket ready. "It's over, Craig. The police already have copies of everything." "Lies!" Craig lunged for the drawer, but Bruno was faster. The German shepherd launched himself through the smoke-filled doorway, a blur of focused fury. His teeth found Craig's arm with precise accuracy, clamping down with the full force of his training. Craig's scream echoed through the house as he stumbled backward, trying to shake off the dog. But Bruno held firm, exactly as he'd been trained, neutralizing the threat without causing fatal damage. Blood seeped through Craig's sleeve as he flailed, his other hand still clutching the partially burnt hard drive he'd managed to grab. Ray hit the panic button on his security system, triggering the direct alert to local police. Through the chaos, he could hear Naomi upstairs, already on the phone with 911. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Craig tried to wrench free of Bruno's grip, but the dog adjusted his stance, keeping him pinned against the wall. The smoke was getting thicker, but Bruno showed no sign of releasing his target. Police cruisers screeched to a halt outside, their lights painting the smoke-filled room in alternating red and blue. Officers burst through the front door, weapons drawn. "Down here!" Ray called out, coughing from the smoke. "Suspect in custody." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Firefighters contained the small blaze while officers secured Craig, who continued struggling even as they cuffed him. The burnt drive fell from his fingers, clattering to the floor. One final piece of evidence of his desperate attempt to hide the truth. Only when the officers had Craig firmly in custody did Bruno release his arm. The dog backed away calmly, returning to Ray's side as paramedics rushed forward to treat Craig's wound. Ray stumbled out onto his front porch, lungs burning from the smoke. He sank onto the steps, drawing in deep breaths of clean night air. Bruno sat beside him, remarkably composed despite the chaos. His fur was untouched by smoke, his posture alert and dignified as he watched the officers leading Craig to a patrol car. Officer Martinez approached, notepad in hand. "We'll need your statement, Ray." Ray looked up at her through watering eyes, then gestured to Bruno. His voice was rough from the smoke as he managed to say, "Don't thank me. Thank the dog." Bruno's tail thumped once against the porch boards, his eyes never leaving Craig as the patrol car door slammed shut. The morning sun filtered through the courthouse's high windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The retrial of Lila Monroe was set to begin in less than an hour, and already the tension in the air was palpable. News crews huddled outside, their cameras trained on the courthouse steps as key figures arrived. Ray Calder adjusted his tie, a rare sight for the usually casual retired officer. Beside him, Bruno walked with measured steps, his training evident in every movement. Naomi Quill clutched her notebook, her usual podcasting equipment replaced by simple pen and paper after the break-in. Maya strode ahead of them, her briefcase packed with evidence that had taken months to compile. The courtroom doors opened at precisely 8:30 a.m. The gallery filled quickly. Reporters, local residents, and even a few former employees from Harrow's Emporium. Ray, Naomi, and Bruno took their places in the front row, directly behind the defense table. Maya arranged her materials with methodical precision. At 9:15 a.m., the side door opened. 2 officers escorted Lila Monroe into the courtroom. Gone was the harsh orange jumpsuit that had defined her image for months. Instead, she wore a simple blue blouse and dark slacks, civilian clothes that seemed to restore a piece of her humanity. Her steps were hesitant, but her back was straight. As she approached the defense table, her eyes swept across the gallery. When she spotted Bruno, her composed expression cracked just slightly. The German shepherd's ears perked forward, his tail moving in a gentle wag of recognition. For the first time since her arrest, Lila's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. It lasted only a moment before she took her seat, but that brief flash of joy seemed to light up her entire face. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Harrison entered, her robe swishing as she took her place at the bench. The proceedings began with opening statements, the prosecution's narrative now seeming hollow against the mountain of evidence Maya had assembled. The systematic dismantling of the original case began with the footage. Maya's voice was clear and confident as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, the complete security footage from Harrow's Emporium on the night of Vincent Harrow's murder, including the previously missing 8-minute segment." The lights dimmed. On the large screen, the grainy but clear footage played. The courtroom fell into complete silence as they watched Lila enter the office, her body language showing clear shock at discovering Vincent's body. They saw her check for a pulse, her hands visibly shaking. The crystal award, the accidental blood transfer, the dropped phone, everything unfolded exactly as Ray had discovered months ago. Then came Craig's entrance. His calm demeanor, so chilling in contrast to Lila's panic, sent whispers through the gallery. They watched him methodically clean the scene, don gloves, and manipulate evidence. Several jurors leaned forward, their expressions hardening as they witnessed the truth unfold. Maya moved on to the 911 call. An audio specialist took the stand, his credentials impeccable. "The call connected at 9:47 p.m., he testified, pointing to the wavelength display. "You can see here where Ms. Monroe's phone made contact with the emergency system. The connection lasted approximately 3 seconds before terminating, consistent with a dropped device." The fingerprint evidence came next. A forensic analyst walked the jury through the comparison between Craig's employee records and the prints found inside the gloves. "The ridge patterns show a definitive match," she explained, highlighting specific points of comparison. "These prints belong to Craig Weaver, not Lila Monroe." Maya's presentation of motive drew audible reactions from the gallery. She laid out a detailed timeline of Craig's financial troubles, his marriage to Vincent's estranged sister, and the inheritance that would have solved all his problems. "Bank records show Mr. Weaver was facing foreclosure," Maya stated, displaying financial documents. "His wife stood to inherit controlling interest in Harrow's Emporium, an inheritance that would have been delayed if Vincent Harrow had sold the business as he was planning to do." When Craig took the stand, his composed facade had cracked. His answers became increasingly defensive under Maya's precise questioning. His eyes darted between the jury and the exit, his fingers drumming restlessly on the witness stand. Maya approached, her expression calm but determined. "Mr. Weaver, Would you explain why you attempted to burn down Mr. Calder's house to destroy evidence? Craig's face twitched. I didn't. That's not. Were you aware that the security cameras captured your entire attempt? His composure crumbled further. Sweat beaded on his forehead as Maya pressed on, mentioning each piece of evidence he'd tried to destroy. Finally, she asked about his threats against Ray and Naomi. Craig's control snapped. His voice rose, bitter and sharp. You think anyone would have cared if she died instead? The words echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Bruno's low growl was audible in the quiet. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Bailiff, take the witness into custody. As officers approached Craig, Maya turned to the jury. Her voice was steady but carried an edge of controlled triumph. No further questions, Your Honor. The jury left to deliberate at 2:45 p.m. The waiting began, but not for long. At 4:15 p.m., barely 90 minutes later, they returned. The foreman stood, paper trembling slightly in their hands. In the matter of State versus Lila Monroe, we find the defendant not guilty. Lila's hands flew to her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maya squeezed her arm gently. Behind them, Ray bowed his head, years of tension finally releasing from his shoulders. Bruno rose to his feet, his posture straight and proud. His single bark cut through the murmurs of the courtroom, sharp, clear, and triumphant. The sound echoed off the high ceiling, a final punctuation to months of struggle and determination. Judge Harrison's gavel fell one last time. Ms. Monroe, you are hereby released from custody. This court is adjourned. The morning sun cast long shadows across the prison walls as Lila Monroe exited through the metal doors one final time. Squinting in the bright light, she clutched a small paper bag of possessions. The air felt different outside, fresher, full of possibility. Reporters gathered with clicking cameras and extended microphones. But Lila focused on the gate ahead, walking deliberately forward. Ray waited by his car, holding Bruno's leash. The German shepherd had been whining since arrival, trembling with energy. As Lila approached, Bruno broke free with sudden strength, bounding straight to her. She dropped to her knees, paper bag forgotten as Bruno reached her. His tail spun joyously, body wiggling with excitement. Tears rolled down Lila's cheeks while Bruno licked her face, his happy whines mixing with her laughter. Hey boy, she whispered into his fur. I missed you so much. Bruno pawed at her shoulders, trying to get closer. Lila held him tightly, savoring his familiar scent and warmth. The reporter's questions faded against Bruno's heartbeat. Ray approached, collected her bag, and waited patiently. That evening, Ray's kitchen filled with aromas of roasted chicken, vegetables, and warm bread. Lila's first real meal in months. Ray, Lila, Naomi, and Bruno gathered at the table, sharing comfortable silence broken only by silverware and Bruno's contented sighs. Ray, Lila said softly, would it be okay if I stayed here for a while? Until I figure things out? As long as you want, kid. This house could use some life. Bruno's tail thumped in agreement as Naomi mentioned her podcast's nomination for the National Digital Journalism Award. That's wonderful, Lila said warmly. Without you and Ray. We just showed people the truth, Naomi replied. Bruno did the hard part. Ray added that Maya had been offered a permanent position at a national civil rights firm. While clearing dishes, Ray mentioned the American Justice Foundation wanted to give Bruno an award in a televised ceremony. Lila looked at Bruno, whose eyes reflected unconditional love. Number, he doesn't need a medal. He just needed me back. Later, Lila took Bruno for a walk through familiar streets. past the park where they once played, the corner store, and finally Harrow's Emporium, now empty with a for sale sign. She paused briefly at this place of heavy memories. Bruno stood watching her face, then moved forward confidently when she turned away. Lila followed, matching his pace, free from fear as they walked toward the future together. If you enjoyed the story of Lila and Bruno, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.